Hello, I'm Craig Rossler, Senior Conference Manager with Centerwatch, and welcome to today's webinar on navigating your clinical trial during COVID-19. This webinar is brought to you by VirTrial. VirTrial has a stable, long-standing virtual care platform customized for clinical trial use with both patient and site needs in mind. VirTrial is using virtual care to transform the clinical research industry by offering a patient management program that combines encrypted video, audio, chat, and messaging and notification capabilities for clinical trial sites to easily and conveniently address specific patient and study needs in a secure environment. We're expecting this session to last about 45 minutes, followed by a live question and answer session. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please feel free to prepare your questions for our presenters. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the presentation, and they will be addressed at the end. To ask a question, you can simply type your question in the area provided and press enter. Questions will not be viewable to other attendees. My pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Kim Gundert is Vice President of Operations at VirTrial. She's an experienced research executive who previously served as the Senior Vice President of Operations at Radiant Research Nexus, the largest site network in the world. We also have Robin Marcus. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Global Care Clinical Trials and has more than 25 years experience focused on innovative executive leadership and successfully operationalizing new product and services. And kicking things off today is Melanie Flores, Vice President of Compliance at Integ Review and is responsible for the daily leadership and management of their compliance program. It's great to have you all with us today. Melanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Melanie Flores, and I'm going to be talking about IRB recommendations and requirements and basically how to continue your research during the COVID-19 pandemic. Although I can only provide you with integrity policy, and many IRBs have the same process of trying to reduce additional burden on research sites, we really be as supportive as possible during the crisis while working with studies to see how best to move forward, especially with treatment protocols that we just can't stop at this time. I know that many decisions have been made on whether or not to continue ongoing research. Many research studies were halted for, and now we're kind of in that next step of how do we going in. And our disaster recovery plan typically did not address any type of pandemic like this, and this is new territory for us all. Most of you probably per FT regulation. I'm sorry, I need to move the slide. Sorry about that. A little technical difficulty. Sorry about that. As most of you know, per FDA regulation, IRB shall follow procedures that ensure changes in research are associated with IRB review and approval, except to parent idea. And I'd like to repeat that last phrase, except where necessary to eliminate apparent hazards to subjects. And I think this is what we all were, but now we're coming out of the immediate decisions that had to be made and on a plan with future studies. About guidance for industry investigators and IRBs, and this guidance has great question and answers appendix that provides very relevant information. And I have provided a link to that, all the COVID-related guidances that are currently posted. Most of the time, I know we are begging for guidances from the FDA, but I believe they've done an excellent job in providing guidance related to COVID-19. And I'm sure that we'll see many more guidances and updates for months and possibly longer than that to come. When talking about changes, we're going to be covering a wide variety of those, and I'm going to try to get through as much as I can, and we'll have time again for Q&A at the end. When we talk about changes to research, the modifications are usually sent via protocol amendment. However, minor changes related to the COVID-19 virus are not required to be reported if they are protocol deviations that really do not affect subject safety. So these are minor changes that are made to the protocol that are not indefinite. But, however, and sometimes if your sponsor site policy requires you to submit a formal change to the protocol, we always suggest that you submit these changes as protocol clarifications or memos. And again, this will just allow you to easily transition back to the originally approved method without further IRB and review and approval. Again, it's just trying to reduce unnecessary reporting. Moving on to telemedicine. I know that we started to see an increase in telemedicine before the health crisis, and now it has just completely taken off. I think this is a great thing, as I believe it is a huge relief for current subjects who are in treatment studies and are benefiting from the trial, and they are getting the opportunity to continue in the research. And I can see this also becoming more of the norm after all of this has settled. I know the benefits of telemedicine include reaching subjects who would otherwise not be able to participate due to their overall health status, transportation issues, or other obstacles that are removed due to telemedicine. Remember, when using telemedicine to write SOPs surrounding these patient visits. I know at this time it's just quick memos to files that are being created as it's fairly new territory, but just remember to make sure that you document how the visits occurred, who participated, and which procedures were completed, as well as those that were not. Documentation is key at this time. And as you are doing this, use the time to draft and perfect an SOP or policy to describe your telemedicine practices. Also remember, when you must ensure that communications are in private settings, telemedicine platforms should have privacy, security, and processes in place to safeguard the data that are outlined and clearly documented. As far as using any type of telemedicine platforms, either doing using phone calls or at-home visits that are taking place, we consider those deviations, and depending on the nature of the study and whether or not they increase risk to subjects, will determine whether or not they are required to be reported to the IRB. Moving to pre-screening. Pre-screening scripts for COVID-19 symptoms prior to screening visits are not required to be submitted for IRB review. Again, this is a global effort and not at all study-specific. However, at this time, many of our clinics are reopening, and we are seeing generic screening script updates, as well as new screening procedures and practices for all future enrollment. We are reviewing and encouraging that telephone screening occurs before actual screening at the research site. Many are even having COVID-19 testing prior to study screening, if not already outlined in the protocol. Again, some of these precautions do not require additional IRB review. However, it'll be important for you to check with your IRB to ensure that you are following their recommendations. I know I can only tell you what IntegraView's requirements are currently. Some of these exclusions include things that are sometimes not required, as the taking temperature upon each arrival, or questionnaires and signs and symptoms related to the virus, and other minor changes that are not at all protocol driven. As far as remote labs and remote visits, I know many researchers are using remote labs for blood draws, and this is an acceptable way to monitor subjects during this pandemic. Also, some may engage in home health services. If home health is an option for your research, determine what personal protective equipment is needed and what additional protective measures are required. What other safety measures can take place to ensure that the safety of the staff member as well as the participant? How will the health status and vulnerability of the participant as well as the staff member entering the home be evaluated? Such things as taking temperature, symptom questionnaire, things like that. Again, not just for the subject, but also for the research staff member. The informed consent documents are really not requiring many modifications at this time, and we are not seeing an increase in IC revisions. However, we are seeing the need for remote consenting, and a lot of questions, around that. And there are specific allowances for which is outlined by FDA guidance, such as, informed consent can be obtained over the phone or video chat. You must document how the IC was provided to the subject, and document how the participant will return, such as, electronic signatures or scanned in emails or even mailed. And now even photographed. I think that's a big thing for any COVID patient where they actually have the virus and they have to obtain consent, and they can't keep the signed copy for contamination reasons. And you may also consider adding a witness to your informed consent process for even further added protection. Again, this isn't a requirement, but it is an additional safeguard that I think is important to discuss. And just remember that if any of these methods are used, you must have, and don't forget the most important thing, which is the informed consent process. the signature is just one piece, and the meaningful, conversation, explanation, and ensuring all the questions are the subject are answered is the most important thing. And the documentation we can get around, but the discussions have to take place, whether that's with the subject or the subject's LAR. Also, remember that you must follow all of your federal, state, and local stay-at-home and social distancing mandates. Questions you may need to consider are you initiating those pre-screening COVID testing for participants and protecting your research staff? Are you taking temperatures upon arrival? Again, and most importantly, how are you managing social distancing? I think that for many clinics have been rearranged to be able to accommodate subjects in a way that keeps everyone safe in the clinic. But again, you know, not only are you having to follow protocol-specific guidelines, but now you're tasked with ensuring that you're following the local laws and staying abreast of what those changes are. And they are, I know our governor is usually talking, you know, every couple of days we're getting updates from our governor on different changes because we are slowly reopening. And so as we're slowly reopening, we're continuing to get, you know, more and more information related to how to do that in a safe manner. So it's important to keep up to date with that and the news related to what's going on locally in your area. We have also been asked about remote monitoring. This type of change is really not reportable. However, it should be documented internally, and the confidentiality section of the informed consent covers the sponsor and affiliates. Therefore, there's really no need for any type of IC revision or subject modification. The FDA recognizes that delays in the on-site monitoring may result in delayed identification of GCP noncompliance. So, again, sponsors should carefully document situations where monitors were unable to access or had to delay monitoring of a clinical site. And when performing those remote visits, to make sure you use a HIPAA-compliant tool and provide the monitor with specific access to only the source materials needed. Ensure to protect the security and integrity of the patient's PHI and PII during all transmissions and of documents during all communications. And any change implemented caused by this pandemic must be documented as COVID-19 related and the reason why, per the FDA. Again, just some housekeeping things. Just remember to keep an up-to-date deviation log. Although not all are going to be IRB reportable, it's important to keep the log up to date and to ensure that you have everything documented. Determine what is the best option for your study in line with regulations and guidance, and of course all of those local rules and guidelines. And of course communicate with your IRB, determine the best plan for your research. In closing, I would just like for us to remember that we're all in this together, and the research community really has done a fabulous job thus far in making decisions that keep the best interest of the subject as top priority. And I think that that's what we all need to do is the subject first, and then the research second. Unfortunately, it's just the most important thing that we can do, and pay attention to what really matters, and that's the people. And I thank you for your time, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kim.
Great. Thank you so much, Melanie. So Melanie provided us some guidelines and framework from IRB perspective, from FDA perspective, and as you can imagine, FDA has also weighed in on telemedicine, and industry has gone from something that was very risk adverse, and it was more of a nice to have, to how can we implement this right now, because now this is the solution. It's not it's a not nice to have, it's a must have. The FDA did release some guidelines, or they updated some guidelines May 11th that outlines within it that remote or live video telemedicine visits do not fall under 21 CFR Part 11 because it's simply just a face-to-face. Now, if you get into actually exchange of documents and any consent and everything through the platform, then that applies. So one thing that I will caveat going into my next slide is VirTrial is HIPAA compliant. It is GDPR compliant, and we are 21 CFR Part 11 compliant in the parts that we do e-consent and collecting of any data. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with telemedicine or what it looks like, I just wanted to put a visual up to allow everyone to see that it's simply, it's not simply FaceTime. I mean, if you want to think of it in its simplest form, you can think of it that way, but it's a way to visually allow the research participant, coordinator, and PI or sub-I all to have a face-to-face interaction. We like to refer to it as a virtual exam room because there are a lot of powerful tools that can be used with the telemedicine visit. So it's more than just the ability to say, hi, how are you? Are things going okay? Have you had any changes? Are you taking your medication? What's your supply like? So there's a lot of features that are built in it, but one thing that is helpful now is everybody can actually be in a different location and still conduct a visit, and it's very simple and easy for sites and patients to use. We understand that if it's not easy to use, no one will use it. So I myself am not a very techie person, and if I can do it, anyone can do it. So as I mentioned, we like to think of it as a virtual exam room. So there's been a lot of advancements in the last couple of years with connected medical devices, monitoring devices for vital signs, for weight, cameras that you can look at skin, you can look at the overall well-being of subjects, you can connect a stethoscope. So there have been, like I said, a lot of advances that before might not have been possible. It would just be face-to-face, and that gives the site and the physician the ability to gauge patients' feedback, or, they said they're feeling okay, but do they really look okay? They look kind of flushed or whatever. But now with all of these tools coming out, it is really powerful that you can do a lot of things in the patient's home that we were unable to do before. I wish a lot of these tools were available years ago when I was coordinating. It would have made things much easier. And so, you've probably heard there, different, with the connected medical devices and stuff, this data can actually stream through the telemedicine platform. So it can pop up and the site can see it. It can also populate directly into sponsors' EDC if that's something that they want to do. So the goal is to not by adding technology complicate the visits and make it more that the site has to manage, but really try to make the process more efficient and reduce transcription errors. So just know that there are a lot of advances that have been made. Of course, the main reason for wanting to or being able to continue visits with patients who are on study now, or a study that's really, really important and needs to move forward, obviously is patient safety. So as I mentioned, it's more than seeing the patient face-to-face, but physician can share maybe a report, an X-ray report, and can actually annotate on it during the visit. They can share that screen with the patient. They can also pull up lab reports. So if it's a lab that maybe we had to have home health come in and draw, or send the patient to a local lab, the physician can pull that up and discuss the lab results at that particular time, and then give guidance on what the next steps need to be. We can also add the ability to incorporate questionnaires directly into the telemedicine platform. So you're not completing a form that is separate and then you're looking away and losing eye contact with the patient. We want it to be a good experience for both on each end. So at the same time that you're asking questions as a coordinator or physician, you can actually enter the answers to those questions right in the form that populates up on the screen. So just a few examples that we're working on right now is the PHQ-9, of course, any other quality of life questionnaires. And then we're working on a COVID treatment study where they want to monitor dyspnea and a progress of the patient. So the other thing about VirTrial that I wanted to mention is not only do we have telemedicine capabilities, but we also have remote monitoring capabilities through proprietary goggles that we have created. They're kind of like a Google glasses, but they work. There's a camera within the glasses, so whatever the coordinator sees at the site, the monitor also sees. So I wanted to put this slide in here, and all of you probably know this and feel this, but this just has to do with the monitoring landscape today, and with the no travel and nobody wanting to travel, just the decrease with no monitoring visits performed, and virtual days on site. So as you all know, everything's being done remotely, but of course there are limitations that, it's what can you accomplish in a telephone visit. So just to give you a little perspective, it's very similar, as I mentioned, to telemedicine. It actually uses the same VirTrial platform, but they are goggles that the coordinator wears and walks around the clinic. So maybe set up a time if you're not normally in the clinic, but monitor wants to do a visit and you want to go over inventory of lab supplies you can take, or drug supply. You can take a picture of the drug cabinet with temp logs or whatever they want, and you can upload those and attach them. Those can be sent to the monitoring. Of course, other things that have come out. We initially designed these for pre-site study visits and assessments being done remotely and avoiding some of the travel, but as you can see, there's been a lot of use cases that have come about and thought of by us and also clients, and oh wow, this could help me do inventory of IP that was just received, and then you can share the shipment receipt or spot check on lab kits, just things like that, sharing of deviation logs. So everything can be done within the platform. You upload the file and then you can share it. And I did see a question come up about, how do we ensure confidentiality and security during this time when we're doing everything remotely. Everything within our platform is, like I mentioned, HIPAA compliant and very secure. So everything that's happening is encrypted. And if you don't know what that means, it just means it's very secure in transit and at rest. So the chance for compromise is very, very low. So as I mentioned with the virtual pre-site technology with the goggles, there have been a bunch of different uses that have come about. We actually had just recently had a client that we are working on using them with home health. So if it's something that the home health nurse is doing at the patient's home and the physician wants to ensure that it's being done correctly because it's a primary measure or something, so the home health nurse would wear the glasses that we provision, and then would do whatever that procedure is that whether it's doing medication administration or something like that they can actually watch and ensure that it's being done correctly. So many uses as you can see. And then you're probably thinking, okay, this is all great, but how can I do this? How can I get involved? Sponsors are the ones that make the decisions. I'm just at the site level, and I don't have a lot of control here. So we did create training, and this actually was created last year. And it is just a very brief training that we put together just to get sites familiar with what is telemedicine, how do you conduct a visit, what technology do you need to have. And sponsors have, sites love it, and sponsors have also responded very positively because they see it as a sign that sites are ready for technology, they're ready to embrace it, as opposed to something that, like back in my early coordinating days, EDC first came out, and it was no input from the sites, no preparation on, this is what it might look like. It was just like, okay, this is what you're going to do, and we're going to send you a laptop for each study, and each EDC system is a different system. So we really want to, take the grassroots approach of really getting sites involved, giving feedback. Are there things that you would change or do differently? So we're offering this training for free, and we've been partnering with ACRP and SCRS, the site and professional organizations. It's on their websites as well as the VirTrial website, and I have the link included here if it's something that you want to do. Very brief, 18 minutes total. It has telemedicine etiquette, as I mentioned, and then you get a certificate and a badge that you can put on your email, and that lets sponsors know. Sponsors have also asked us if we are able to, when they're doing feasibility for a new study, if we're able to recommend any sites that we are aware of that have taken some kind of virtual training or are ready and understand the basics of technology. And so that is also a perk for sites that take the training. And this is just kind of a recap of what I mentioned about how can you help. You can, as Melanie mentioned, anything related to how you're conducting the visits, it would be a good idea if you don't already have something to create some SOPs around how the visits are being conducted, making sure that you're documenting if it wasn't completed in person and the protocol doesn't specify that you're actually documenting that. It might not be a deviation, but it's good to have in your documentation of how it occurred, who was involved, and which procedures were completed. If it's a particular study and sponsor just says, okay, we can use telemedicine or we can use telephone call, but we are not collecting blood work at this time, then just make sure you're documenting, of course, that part of the procedures was not completed, and make sure that you're keeping your deviation logs up to date within IRB guidelines. As Melanie said, there have been quite a few changes that you don't actually need to be reporting to IRB. So, just try to get yourself as best situated as possible to kind of work through these challenging and very different times. So I will stop there, and I will turn it over to Robin. She's going to tell you about home health.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, so the part that I'm going to focus on here is really taking it from that virtual exam room, as Kim so eloquently expresses what VirTrial does. And let's talk about when you need something that is more hands-on with that local touch, right? Whether the patient can or participant can go to a local lab to have the labs done. Again, there are some participants who are very weary of that, right? And the exposure, there are some who that's not an option for, either from where they live or because of their disease or because of not having the ability to be mobile in that way. And so there is other options, such as doing home visits. And that is what Global Care does. And we see patients in over 60 countries around the world for home visits. We've been quite busy as of late, as I'm sure you can all imagine. Before I move to my next slide, which is on pharmacy services, I do want to talk about some of the things that are available and to think about when looking at home visits, because I think just as Melanie was talking about as well, it's not only looking at when or what has been our current environment, but we're in an evolving landscape right now. It's a forced evolution, no doubt, but the landscape is definitely evolving. It is different in different geographic areas, both within the U.S., even within different states, along with different countries around the world. And you need to find something and implement things that are very flexible with regards to compliance in each of those situations and in each of those geographies. So home care could be things like being the witness for informed consent, okay? We can do things like the blood work at home And therefore, even if they still did need to go to sites, even as measures begin to lift, this can decrease the amount of time that the participant would be at the site. This would give the PI that information prior to the visit, which could make it more efficient as well. So looking at things in the schedule of assessments to say what could be done at home. ECGs can be done at home. Spirometry, vital signs, as we're all aware of, but patient-reported outcomes, even some things that are rater, where the visiting nurse or professional would need to be a rater, are options for home care. So there are many things that can be done in-home to make the virtual, kind of virtual exam room more of one that integrates touch and that exam. We have even implemented many studies where we're doing a physician-directed exam that is using, as Kim was talking about, a telemedicine platform at the same time that the nurse is right there, so that the PI can say, well, palpate that. How are they feeling? And it can be more interactive with the nurse basically being the hands for the PI. Taking it from things that you may be relatively familiar with home visits and what happens there, also to what else is available. Things like central pharmacy services. And this is really important as we look at not only the landscape during a pandemic or crisis, but also coming out of such situations. Because as we know, as sites closed, or maybe part of the site can open, but not the pharmacy, and what's going to need to happen for that. So there are central pharmacy services. We'll start by talking about the U.S. We have a central pharmacy. This is a pharmacy that's licensed in all 50 states. And so that means they have pharmacists, actually primary and backup pharmacists that are licensed in all 50 states. And that allows them to dispense patient-specific drugs directly to patients. And they can send that. There's a variety of means of being able to send that. And when it takes, so that's one option, just sending drug directly to patients that would normally be picking that up during a site visit. But also then, if it is something that can be given at home, then coordinating that with a home nurse or other home clinician visit so that they can administer that medication. Any central pharmacy would need to adhere to the same requirements that you have with any site pharmacies, right? And so that secure, temperature-controlled, limited access storage, having the appropriate, of course, facilities and standard operating procedures, the ability, if need be, for the compounding, the mixing and labeling and dispensing that is study-specific. The ability to keep a perpetual inventory. These can also, the central pharmacies could ship either to sites or the patients and follow cold chain logistics. Also, the sourcing of commercial products and devices such as infusion pumps that would be necessary to give the product at home. and then also related pharmacy supplies. So there are these pharmacies not only in the U.S., we have them in Europe, Australia. So you should always ask about these capabilities and see what is available given where the participants live. We see many where the site is in one country and the patient or participant is in a completely different country. And this can be a very good option for that as well. Some other services, and what I think is important in this again is not only looking at during the pandemic, but what is the landscape going to be forward? And that's really nebulous. And that can be the scariest part, and also you don't want to, though, do nothing. You need to have some type of plan, and a plan that is flexible so that it can change easily and rapidly to accommodate either an increase in restrictions or decreases, and again, different restrictions in different places. So the use of call center services, this could really be beneficial for studies that have been put on hold. And this could be either inbound or outbound. So to help with things such as screenings, or if sites do not have the ability to quickly ramp up, using a call center type service to help in the screening of patients and pre-qualification of them. During being able to use it for participants to call if they have questions about any of the services that they'll be receiving at home, after hours services, other things that have typically fallen onto the site, but now may not be possible. And then site support services. Certainly things that we've learned, regardless of what happens in our landscape and world going forward, there are learnings that we've all taken away during this pandemic. The use of telemedicine and remote monitoring that Kim was talking about, better local supply chain. We've heard a lot about that. And what will happen for the studies that have been put on hold or enrollment has been delayed, and what will sites need to be successful as they're coming back up to speed and back into, if they will ever be able to come back into full services. We know that many sites have had to do layoffs. And so being able to quickly ramp up again could be a real struggle. So site support services is something that we offer so that qualified personnel can actually help to provide support specifically for a study or group of studies, and could help with the scheduling of patients, screening of patients. Maybe it's the data entry that they'll need help with, or even hands-on services for phlebotomy, cannulation, or assessments on site. This could be temporary. It may be just an amount of hours that is budgeted, but what we like to do is work with the sponsors so that this then becomes a service that is free and available to the sites because it's paid for by the sponsor of the study. So what are some of the benefits of this local touch or at-home visits, central pharmacy services, things that we would consider direct-to-patient type services? First, it provides a huge amount of study continuity. We've actually developed something called the Study Continuity Program, which is basically an insurance policy and can be taken out at any point in time and cover one to multiple studies. And this then allows, basically it says, these are the services that we would need for our studies. We set that up and we put it in the vault for when and if it is needed in the future. And what we did in response to COVID-19, the pandemic, is actually developed something that was directly related to safety services and has allowed sponsors to quickly implement for studies. And these were studies that we had no previous knowledge of, but constructed this in such a way that allowed them to come up to speed in having visits done in 2 to 4 weeks time from the time of basically saying, yeah, move forward, award, to actually seeing patients. This, of course, ensures safety and decreases potential exposure, meeting the needs, as Melanie had said, of participants is something now that we are so keenly aware of in a way that we'd never thought about it before. What are they willing to do? What will decrease their exposure? What decreases exposure of site staff, of home care providers? Evaluating things like, is this home care provider seeing or supporting COVID-19 studies? And if so, is that really what we would want? We've taken a firm stand on that, in that we are not supporting COVID-19 studies because of the sheer amount of patients and studies that we support, and did not feel that would be safe for either our clinicians or the patients that we do see. The ability to retain patients. We would hate that patients and participants drop out of studies because they don't feel it's safe, or it becomes impossible for them to go to a site or the site is closed. Protecting the gathering of key data, making sure that you do have safety data, key data for your study, whether that's PK draws, whether that is the ECGs, other safety parameters, CBC, chem, etc. Very important. Of course, providing peace of mind to everybody involved, the participants, the families, sites, sponsors. And we have to remember that for some participants, clinical studies are not optional. This is their care option. This is what they are hoping will be the thing that is either the cure or at least prolonging whatever their disease state is. And that's really important. Different clinical trials mean different things, but for many, it's not an option to stop or halt the trial. Again, really have to think about all the different stakeholders and what it means for them to participate. And then what does it mean in the short term and the long term? And hopefully I've hit on both of those things, a little bit about immediate needs and what you could need right now with all the stakeholders, but also what does this mean for the future? How do we leverage telemedicine, remote monitoring, changes in the supply chain, things like what becomes elective surgeries and how you conduct those in the future safely, and how do we create safeguards now for the unknown in our ever-evolving landscape. Kim, I hand it back over to you. Hopefully we've left some time for questions and answers.
Great. Yes. Thanks, Robin. Appreciate that. And actually, I'm going to let Craig let us know what questions have come in and what we can answer.
Yes, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, now is your opportunity to have your questions answered by our presenters. Remember, this portion of the conference is also being recorded. Again, to ask your question, you can type your question in the area provided and press enter. We'll get to as many questions as we can. We have several questions in already. First one's coming in. Say, how do you verify patient identification?
This is Kim. I can answer that. I am guessing that you were wondering about the telemedicine consultation and how do you, if it was in-clinic visit, you would use their ID card, make a copy, all of that. You can do very similar things with telemedicine. So same thing, you would have them show their ID. You can take a copy of it, put it into their file. You can also take a picture of them through the platform and it gets posted, of course, just within their profile, but so that if somebody else conducts the next visit, they know that it's already been verified and the patient matches, the patient that joins the next telemedicine consultation is the same visit who has their picture in the profile. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, I think so. Thank you very much. And our next question, how do you think COVID-19 will disrupt the clinical trial current model?
I hope
well,
that we...
go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, I think that we've talked a lot about that with regards to, I think, the increased use of telemedicine, I think more accepting and understanding of what is available at home. And I think it has everybody thinking about contingency plans and what is appropriate with contingency plan. I don't think anyone could have ever anticipated a global pandemic of the nature that we've all been experiencing, but it certainly has brought to the forefront the what if question. Kim, I don't know if you see anything different.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The other thing that I would mention, I feel like one positive that's come out of this whole pandemic is clinical trials are gaining more and more awareness, because I feel like every day on the news they're talking about clinical trials are being conducted to develop a vaccine. So historically, I know that there has been some, it seems like anytime there was anything negative about clinical trials, that's what was displayed in the media. And I feel like more people are becoming aware of clinical trials, which we've all been trying to increase awareness for years. So not only on how we're conducting the trials, but maybe more people will be open to actually participating in trials.
Yes, very good point. Thank you. Next question, they ask, any recommendations on remotely monitoring informed consent?
Yeah, sure. I can take this. I think that the main thing is to have a secure platform to provide the consent document to the CRA. There is some advice out there with discretionary use of other they're not as secure platforms, just in the immediate need. But I think that if you're going to use this moving forward, the remote monitoring, it's going to be really important to get a secure platform in place for your trials. And again, this is something, I know that this is something that's usually provided and then omitted. It's just for verification purposes. So it is something that's used on a temporary basis, and then once the CRA has reviewed it, then it can be then removed from there. There's plenty of Part 11 compliance out there for you to see, and I think that it's just going to be important to start investigating those and seeing which one works best for your study and for your team.
Yeah, thank you, Mel. Our next question, they're asking, do you anticipate an increase in use of POC testing at the patient's home?
Well, I can answer. Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
Let me just, yeah. So we have already at VirTrial seen an increase of this. Actually, even before COVID, we had, kind of an innovative thinking sponsor who was thinking about, okay, it is for doing pregnancy tests for the patient to do pregnancy tests at home in between visits for a study where medication has teratogenic effects. So that was one incident, and of course now with COVID upon us, they're looking at using telemedicine for additional pieces. But I do see things that not only is it something that is easier to do, like a pregnancy test, but the site can watch the patient do the test. Obviously, they won't watch them go to the bathroom, but they will actually watch them do the testing to make sure that they're doing it correctly. So, Robin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, there are specific blood monitoring devices that are point of care as well, iStat, etc. I think that challenges with particular devices for point of care is still the fact if the cartridge itself needs to be temperature controlled, there does need to be another level of consideration in the supply chain of how that will occur. We have many more options, though, with temperature control in the supply chain than we did even a couple of years ago with the use of things like NanoCools, Newlam boxes, Cubix refrigerators, etc. So I do think that point of care testing will increase. I think those devices could be rather expensive. But there are other things too, things like dried blood spot, things as Kim's talking about where participants are actually collecting their specimens. So whether that's fecal, urine, even blood with a finger stick, etc. We see this POC testing, of course, with with diabetes patients all the time, and that's very accepted. So we need to move beyond that, and I think there's some great apps that are also with this, things that are allowing heart monitoring and even ECGs, EEGs as well for point of care. So it's a very exciting time to see some of that technology taking root.
Yes, I do agree. Next question. Are there different state laws and regulations pertaining to data privacy issues that we need to be aware of?
It's more like the U.S. falls under the FDA, but when you get they're similar across the U.S. But when you get to other countries, there are definitely differences of what's allowed and what's not allowed, and that's where you need to lean on your sponsor or vendor to ensure that everything is being conducted within compliance of those areas. Melanie, I don't know if you had anything else that you would add to that.
Melanie, you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. Sorry. I think that the only thing that I would add is I just want to remind everybody it's something that comes up in a lot of these types of platforms, but, making sure that you are following any kind of, if you're using text messages and things like that, it's important to, to get permission prior to using any type of, communications through that as well, because that's a regulate highly, the law gets involved at that point. Sorry about that.
Right. Yeah, and make sure it's like you had mentioned before, a secure platform, that you're not just texting back and forth through your standard phone, your home cell phone.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Next question is: can two monitors have access to the goggles used by the coordinator?
They can. So one thing that I didn't hit on is with the telemedicine platform and with the goggles as well. You can, up to 10 people can be on one consultation at the same time. So they just get invited to the video consultation.
That's great, thank you. And another question came in. They're asking, should general safeguards such as temperature screening, PPE, etc., be described by sponsors in study protocols? And if so, how do we avoid conflict with site policies and procedures?
This is Melanie. I'll take this one. I do understand that. I don't think that it needs to be. I don't necessarily think that it needs to be included in protocols. I know that I'm not saying that it can't be. And if it is, then I think that then you go by what your most stringent policy is. So if there's if there is some type of protective equipment that you use at your site that's above and beyond what's in the protocol, then you follow your site process. Whereas if there's something above and beyond in the protocol, then you go with the protocol. So you take the more stringent rule of whatever is outlined. But I do think it's important for your site, no matter what the protocol says, to develop your own policies and procedures to, ensure the safety and welfare of your staff and subjects that are coming in. So yeah, I don't think there's a rule on. I haven't seen, to be honest, I haven't seen much of that included in protocols that we've seen. Even new protocols, we're not seeing that in the protocols themselves. So, but I'm not saying that we won't, because I know this is, it seems like it's a continuing issue, and it does factor into, subject protections. But we're seeing it more on the site's end than on the sponsor side of things. Thank you. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thanks a lot. Next question. Mentioned you, Robin, that you mentioned the home health provider could act as a witness to informed consent. Can you clarify if a witness is needed, should it be an impartial witness? Did she mean witness the participant's signature? We work in Africa where impartial witnesses are used due to literacy. So the use of the term witness is very specific in that environment.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So witness it typically means that you're witnessing the signature that patient is giving. So it is not someone else besides the patient signing, or if the patient is deemed in that country or under that study that they can't sign, that it is the appropriate person under whether they have a durable power of attorney, whatever other. So it is not someone who is necessarily actively consenting the patient, although home care nurses can be trained. We have done that with other studies to do the informed consent. It is not preferable, though. We really do it's under an exception, and it usually has to do with not consenting the direct participant, but if family members in a trial are also in any way participating by doing biologic samples as well, for any vector shedding, things like that, that then the consenting of those individuals can help be supported. So not necessarily talking about what is specifically needed in Africa. I was speaking more generically.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all. I think that's all the time for questions we have for today. Any final remarks before we wrap up?
Yeah, this is Kim with VirTrial. I want to thank everybody for taking an hour out of your day to listen and attend the webinar. Hopefully we provided some helpful information for all of you, and you have at least one item that you can take away and start implementing. I believe if you have any further questions for Melanie, Robin, or myself, that you can still submit through Craig, and we can certainly follow up and answer all of your questions, or you can visit our respective websites and get in touch with us there. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. On behalf of Centerwatch and VirTrial, I'd like to thank our participants for joining us today. Be sure to fill out the survey at the conclusion of this webinar. Your feedback is very important to us. This now concludes today's webinar. Have a great day and hope you can join us again in the future.